Okay, so as I was saying before everybody got here, this is going to be I'm going to talk about Portal and developing with data, because I've been to enough Clojure talks to know that if you want people to pay attention, you put the word data in your title. So I'm going to try and cover Clojure's superpower, what I mean by developing with text. I'm going to introduce you to TAP if you've never heard of it before, talk about what developing with data means, then I'm going to do a bit of a Portal showcase, and then I'm going to be out of time before I get to the summary. So what do I mean by Clojure's superpower? So this line comes from Sean Caulfield. He did a series of talks, but the spoiler, that all the talks basically come down to the idea that the Clojure's REPL is its superpower. They're good talks. I recommend watching one. It kind of set me on my journey of developing with data. So when we work in Clojure, we have a tool for instant feedback. It's faster than running your code through a debugger. It's faster than using a unit test. We can use it for exploring data or exploring code, experimenting with changes, or creating brand new code. That's what the REPL is. But the way that I used to work with the REPL is what I always call developing with text. It's how I was taught from the Brave Clojure book. It's how pretty much every guide I've ever seen talks about using Clojure. So what do I mean by developing with text? So you're probably working something similar. Some of you might use something that I don't know. Probably a lot of you do. You're probably working what I would call developing with text. So you might evaluate a form, something like that, get your output here. You might send it to a comment. You might use println to print it out to your REPL. I know I've seen people throw exceptions in the middle of their code just so they can see that the state of the world here is that current string is hello world. So all of these are great. They work. They've been used for generations. But the one thing I will say is that they're all static output. You get that output, you look at it, you then move on. So the REPL gives us all this power. So I'm going to sort of show you what happens if we supercharge it. And to do that, I'm going to introduce you to TAP, if you've never heard of it before. It's the first tool in your developing with data toolbox. It's excellent. Whenever you look at visual REPLs, you're going to see TAP, even though it isn't directly tied. And Portal, which is my tool of choice, uses it a lot. I was going to read this out, but I haven't got the breath to read this out. This is from the Clojure 1.10 changelog. The gist of it is that TAP is designed for logging or debugging. It's globally accessible. It's shared. They haven't actually put it in here, but it's non-blocking as well. And it's a function you can call anywhere, and it is part of Clojure core. It's not a library. So give you a quick demo of how it works. If we've got a map that we want to print out, that is an incredibly unhelpful way of looking at that data. And we might want to tap it out. So tap it out and nothing happens. Tap doesn't do anything by default. You can put taps throughout all of your code and nothing will happen. What you do is you can add a tap target with add tap. And then if we run the same thing, it's been pretty printed. So when you call tap, it goes and looks for all of the tap targets that you've added and just calls the function that you've attached to it. Tap is great because we can just throw it in the middle of a function because, as I said, it's non-blocking and you can use it anywhere. So here I'm just tapping out some arbitrary data in the middle of a function call. You can tap in text, you can tap in tests, you can even tap in exception handlers, although I probably wouldn't recommend that. But the key thing here is that tap receives data. It doesn't return, it hasn't received this string I've got over here. It's received the data, which I have then chosen to use pretty print to turn into a string. But I can use any function I like. I could have, we'll see what we can do with it. So tap, great. Never ever use print line debugging again. You never need it. But it's got an issue that I don't like. It's not an issue, it's fine. It actually returns a value, a bool, indicating whether it was successful. So if you try and do this, which is what you'd probably instinctively want to do, which is just throw it in the middle of your threading macro to see what happens at each stage, you're probably not expecting to just see true. I use tap all the time, so I have like tap helpers that let me do this. I've even got one that's just like tap thread. I have dozens of different tap helpers because I use tap a lot. So now that you're all experts in tap, I'm going to finally talk about Portal. I love Portal. So this is the current developing with data tool that I love so much. I'm going to show it off with Emacs, but you can use it with VS Code and Vim and whatever else you want. I'm going to try to force myself to use the mouse so that you can see what I'm clicking on, but everything can be controlled with the keyboard as well.
Chris, one question.
Go ahead.
Regarding your utilities around that, do you have them published anywhere? Very interesting.
Sorry, what was that?
Your audio is quite quiet, Ernesto, but I think I picked it up. Do you have them published anywhere, Chris?
They're very, very hacky, but I do actually plan to, like, because I have dozens, I was basically planning on creating a sort of tap helpers repository that maybe also with some guidance on some of the quirks of tap. But yeah, I do want to put it up. In fact, you're probably going to see a lot of stuff here where I'm going to say at some point I'd like to put this up. But a lot of it is very, very hacky because I only really started using Portal and Tap a couple of months ago, but I've been using it a lot.
That'd be great, yeah.
Okay, so first step to using Portal is to close your REPL because you will never ever need it again, or at least I never ever use it again. You need to have Portal as a dependency on your project, however you choose to get it in there. Just require the Portal API, and then you can open Portal just with Portal open. Get this little web browser window pop up. We need to set it as a tap target. This is basically a helper function. It does add tap Portal submit. I think it does that, but Portal, you can just add it as a tap that way, and then we can just start tapping. Chances are this doesn't look like anything useful to you if you because it's even less useful than the previous view that we had of the map. But that's because I'm going to introduce you to the inspector. So what Portal does is it produces a list, so it grows upwards of these inspector viewers. You can think of the inspector as a general purpose viewer for any type of data. But way down here at the bottom, I actually have an option that lets me change to a different viewer. For example, a table. So now that same data that I just had outputted as a pretty printed string, I now have as a table. There are also commands down here that you can run on this. So if I click down here and choose select columns, I can say that I actually only care about the ID column and the batters column. And then I can put that into a table. I can, these are maps, so I can throw them out as trees. I can also filter, so I can say, find me all of the ones with blueberry, which only has one. I can, there's a command for count, to count how many records I've got. And I can also select, so if I select this and then I alt click up here, whoops, not here, here, I can also do a deep diff and see the difference between these two. So the reason why this works is it's just data. We aren't receiving the stringified output. We aren't receiving a static output. What Portal is getting there is data, the data that we have sent to it, data we've tapped to it. And that means that we can transform that data, we can manipulate it, we can analyze it, all without typing another line into our buffer. Yeah, I said that the REPL was good for exploration, experimentation, and creation. And I think that Portal just makes every single one of those better. Just remembered actually another thing that you can do, another couple of things actually. If I click here, way down here at the bottom, you can actually see the path to get to this value. So it's the first element or the 0th element, batter 3 type, which is very, very useful. But also there's another command which I have used for non-debugging purposes, non-development purposes, which is I can actually copy this out as JSON. So I can take this table that I've filtered, that I've selected the columns that I wanted, and I can now copy the data out as JSON without writing another bit of code or going into another program. I've used that quite recently. That's useful. The other copy up here copies this content as Eden, so that I can just paste it in here and use it in my code. So this is the, well, filtered. It's just the columns that I selected, and I've been able to pull it back into my code.
So when you were applying a function to the value, there was like a new, I'm not sure how these are called. It's like a new buffer inside Portal.
Yeah, so Portal has Portal has these like back forward buttons. So when you apply a function, it creates a new layer inside that you can then go back and forth into. You actually get the same effect. If I double click on this topping here, it creates like a new buffer to focus down on just that section that I'm looking at. And you can keep doing that down the tree to just sort of focus down all the way down to like an individual value. That answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. So this behaves like a list, so very similar to browser history too. Yeah.
So yeah, this you can go back and forth, but it's not like it's not like the fantastic Emacs history or anything. It is just whatever change you've made. You can only go back, and once you've made another change, you've altered the history from that point. Yeah, Portal goes beyond displaying just tables of numbers or tables of words or whatever. So I've got this useful image that I can just tap out. This image, I can actually use the bin viewer to see the actual hex code for it. I'm going to put it back into my more useful view. Portal can view hiccup, markdown, HTML. So if I go to here, I switch this to hiccup. Here is some markdown. Here's some HTML. And even the little annoying button that I've added works. And you can actually pull straight from the internet with like Slurp. So I haven't quite, as much as I love Portal, I haven't completely replaced my web browser with Portal yet, but it is very neat. There is also a code view, which is also probably worth pointing out. That gives you like syntax highlighting on your on code that you put into it. So yeah, it's not just numbers, but it is actually really good for numbers as well. So I'm just going to clear the view. So I'm going to tap out this. This is actually not really that useful. Even though Portal is wonderful, this is not a more useful view than just tapping out to the console. But what you might have noticed is that when we opened Portal, I bound it to this p def. And that means that I can actually pull this code back into my session with @p, just deref it. So if I just evaluate this now, you'll see that whatever I have selected in Portal comes right back into Emacs, so I can just use it. So here is an example where I am very hackily converting this data to meet the Vega Lite spec. So I've got it selected over here. I evaluate this. I've now got a line chart for it, which if I select this, I can switch it to a scatter chart. I can export this as SVG, PNG. I can also, because remember, it's just data, TM. I can switch this to a table. This is the data it is. It's not anything special. It's not an image. It is the data. And if I really want to, I can copy this data out as JSON. It's just data. So Ernesto mentioned earlier about using commands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap out this data again, actually. If I create this function that hackily converts it to meet the Vega Lite spec, Vega Lite is just the spec for graphs and charts and things. I can actually register that as a command within Portal using this register. And then if I click on this data, I can then click down here and I now have my function in Portal. I can run that and I can plot that axis without actually typing any code in Emacs. I can just, well, any code after I've registered the command, I can run this function. That is very cool. It currently only supports single arity functions, but I have hopes that it will support more at some point. And here's the big negative with Portal. It's not a negative with Portal. It's a negative with all of the visual REPLs that I've used, which is that it's just data, which unfortunately means that if you were to just use a REPL to output an image, you'll get the string buffered image 8 by 10, whatever. Whereas in Portal, you're going to be having in memory all of the bytes that represent that image, all of the metadata that it needs, as if you had that data. It can't be garbage collected until you clear. Then it'll get garbage collected. So there's a button in the UI up here. There's a function you can call, or if you're like me and you use Portal so much, you can actually bind it to a thing in Emacs to clear it. So, or in VS Code or Vim, if you want to use those instead. I don't think you would have to. For most cases, you probably wouldn't have to clear your buffer for an entire day or something, but I keep my Portal windows open for days on end, so I need to clear them occasionally. Portal can also show atoms. So if we pull in our useful image again, but this time as an atom, I'm going to tap it out. You might notice there's a tiny symbol over here, a little deref symbol, and that tells you that it's automatically derefed that image. And then if I update that image, it's updated that actual image, and I can keep doing that until the image starts to make me feel ill, which generally doesn't take very long. And Portal actually watches your atoms. So, whoops, if I was to tap out the current time as an atom, might be a bit small, and zoom in. Because this is a web browser, you can use all the usual web browser things like Zoom and whatever. So there's my time. If I start a timer that updates it, you can see that Portal is watching that atom for changes, which is very useful. Here's one of my favorite things. So Portal is great for exploring your database. So if I tap out the results of an XT query and throw it into a table, already, this is a great way of looking at my data. Portal is wonderful. If I want to see who Luce's manager is, what I can actually do is register a command that navigates to that entity. And then I can just click here and say, who's Luce's manager? Well, if I do get entity, Luce's manager is Bob. Who's Bob's manager? Click here, get entity, Alice. So I can now use Portal to navigate through my data. Again, I haven't had to type any code over here. I've had all my usual tools like tree and table views, but I've managed to stay entirely within the world of Portal. And you'll also see not a lot of code to do that. That's pretty good. But you've probably found it really annoying watching me tap out something. So you've seen me tap something out and then bring my mouse all the way over here every time to change it to pretty print or table or whatever. What you can do is you can add metadata to tell it what you want the default view to be. So this is exactly the same as that tap up there, but I've added the metadata to say pretty print it by default. The gotcha there is that you can't add metadata to everything. So if I try and do this, I'll get an exception. So just be aware that if you do what I did and write a helper so that you can tap something out as pretty printed really quickly, you need to actually check if it's an instance of iObj, otherwise you'll throw an exception. And a big sort of useful trick to know is that you don't have to use one viewer for all of your data. So what I've done here is I've said I want to use the inspector viewer, which is the default viewer, for the outer layer of this map, but then I'm going to use pretty print for each of the elements within it. So if I evaluate that, you'll see that what it's done is it's grouped each of these entities into their own little block, but each of the blocks individually is pretty printed. So this doesn't have to just be like this function. You can assign some metadata to say how you'd like it to be printed in a function that's 3 namespaces away. And then just when you finally come to pretty print it, so finally come to tap it out, it'll go down the tree and do everything in the default viewers that you provided. So there are some viewers, default viewers. There are a lot of default viewers that I haven't used, but some that I think are worth calling out is there is an exception viewer that gives me my stack trace and my data that I provided and whatever. You'll mostly see this if you choose to use Portal as your actual REPL, which I do not. I just use it instead of my REPL. But it is worth knowing that it's there. And there is a test result viewer, which I'm not going to demonstrate because I haven't used it yet. So it looks quite cool in the screenshot that I saw, but I haven't actually had a chance to try it yet. This is where this is my current, like, this is the equivalent of me using a paintbrush. I love creating custom viewers for Portal. So it is currently undocumented. On my list of things to maybe talk about possibly doing is documenting some of this. But I'm going to do a quick showcase of some of the custom viewers that I have used. I'm kind of hiding behind this load custom viewers, the slight ugliness of how some of this works, and also the slight ugliness of the code that I wrote to do it. But I was actually writing something that generated XT queries a few weeks ago. And the pretty printing of XT queries is actually pretty nice. I like the syntax coloring. Remember, it's just data, so I can turn it to a tree or whatever if I want to. But I think that the pretty print is quite nice. But I created this little XT query viewer because I was doing some quite weird stuff. And what this does is it pulls out the find, pulls out the in, pulls out the rules, and then the where clauses get turned into a table of triples. So you've got, yeah, well, I'm sure you all know how XT works. And one of the neat things about this is that if I've got a subquery like I've got here, I can actually jump into this subquery and I can now copy out this subquery and just use it. I focus down on that subquery and I can now use that subquery as if it was the whole query. I could do xtq at p to pull it back out of Portal. And then I can just provide wherever inputs I need, A, B, C, and I can run that. I think is quite a neat feature if you're using a lot of subqueries, which I was. So Portal can display HTML, which means that we can use it to pull in JavaScript libraries. So I've got my little wibbly wobbly node graph. And this is a graph of my a network graph of a GraphQL schema that I was working on. And I did do this as another demo because this combines with the atom thing that we were talking about earlier. So I'm just going to add a, so let me just clear this view. So I'm going to tap out this GraphQL. If I switch to my schema now, which is called example GraphQL apparently, and I do, this also has a repository reference. If I can type, oh, that's broken something. Nobody saw that. Repository. So I'm going to add a link in client to repository, save, instantly client is connected to repository now in my graph, because this is an atom that looked at an atom, a file watcher. These aren't, these are just normal Clojure tools. What else have we got here? Oops. Go here. So I was talking this through with Malcolm on Thursday, and I noticed that he was tapping out ring requests and ring responses. So I was like, what can we do with ring requests and ring responses? So this is a ring request. Pulled out the method, the URI, the headers, the details, and I've even generated a little curl that you can copy and paste out and use on the command line. This one I'm kind of cheating. So this is a ring response. I pulled out the status code, description of the status code, and the long description of the status code, headers, details, and the body, which I've rendered as HTML. If I was doing a little more work into it, I could probably say like, well, okay, if it's JSON, I should be outputting it as JSON, but just to sort of demonstrate this, you can use this sort of view ring requests and ring responses. It's also quite neat. Let me clear that so nobody's distracted by the beauty of my ring requests and ring responses. So I have shown you how I use tap to replace my REPL with Portal. I just tap stuff out. There is actually a function of Portal that lets you use Portal as your REPL. So every time you evaluate something, it goes to Portal. You just add this middleware to your middleware stack. Personally, I don't use that because I prefer to control what data I want to explore in Portal. But one advantage is that you will get that like nice exception view. Although I actually haven't looked at it, I don't think you'll get the link back to be able to navigate to the line of code, which is something you'll miss out on, possibly. But you can use it as your proper REPL. I just don't recommend it. Big reason why I don't recommend it as well is because that thing I talked about how you have to be really aware of the memory that you're using if you're keeping it open for weeks on end. If you're using it as a REPL, you're going to need to be even more aware because you're probably sending stuff that you're not even thinking about. Portal is not.
Oh, just a question. It seems. Well, is it possible to have like several portals at the same time, or does it make sense? Or
so
to do so?
I would like, and I haven't figured out if I can do this yet. I would kind of like to have a REPL portal and a tap portal. I don't know if it's possible to do that. What I will tell you is that I have my day-to-day work at the moment. I have a portal that's open for site, and I have a portal that's open for the project that I'm on. And what that means is that I actually have site tapping out when a request comes in, and my actual project is like firing off those requests, so I can see the request from the point of view of the project that I'm on, and then I can see that request from the point of view of site. So I know you can open up multiple portals connected to different projects or different REPL sessions. I don't know if you can do what I want to do, which is have a separate one for a REPL and a separate one for tap.
Yeah. When you're saying your actual project, is that a Clojure script project or another Clojure server?
It is Clojure. Portal does support Clojure script. You just have to make sure that Clojure script is in your dependencies, and then it'll handle all of the like JS alert or JS alert. The most annoying thing I could have thought of to use as an example, but anything Clojure scripty should get rendered, like JavaScript exceptions or whatever. Trying to think off the top of my head what you would try and tap out. These are all also when you do create your own custom viewers, they are React components. Just to mention in case that's useful to know.
Okay.
One of the things that I would love to do, and I haven't quite figured out a way of doing it yet, is so I found a sort of hacky way of getting JavaScript libraries into Portal. I would also like to figure out if there's a way I can sort of jack in some Clojure dependencies as well to be able to do, well, use the tool of my choice inside my custom viewers. I will sort of give a little bit of a hint behind the curtain of this ring request. The reason why it's tap rec, in fact, I'm just going to tap it out again. Let's do this. If I switch this back to an inspector viewer, you'll see that what I've actually done is I've attached the curl as metadata. That's how I'm doing that, is I'm generating the curl with this tap rec function and attaching it as metadata that my custom viewer can then pick up. I don't even know if that was remotely related to your question, but it was something that was on my mind when I was using Portal. Did you get an answer to your question, or did I get distracted?
No, you answered it completely. So you haven't used it with Clojure script so far, right?
I haven't done a lot of experimentation with Clojure script beyond just checking that it works, but it does work. Anything that's anything that you are tapping out that is more JavaScripty should have appropriate views.
Yeah.
Like I said, I haven't used it enough to really tell you extensively if it's useful or not.
Yeah, I was thinking that it could be very useful for example, in our current project, we are dealing with reframe, and yeah, I mean, we are using either reframe 10x or refrisk, which are like visualization tools, but quite honestly, they suck. So I was just thinking that this might make a good replacement for those.
It's probably worth a look. I will tell you that the last reframe thing I was working on, I did use I still use the 10x tools because I hadn't quite used this enough. Maybe next time I'll have a look at using it. And if not, I'm sure you can find a way to make it work.
It strikes me that it's possible that if it has access to the JavaScript runtime, you'd be able to just use your application's components. You'd be able to see like previews of your own application's components possibly as well, which would be very neat. That might be a bit far-fetched, but
yeah, I think I haven't, like I use Portal. I've used Portal every single workday and a couple of non-work days for like the last 2 and a bit months. And I love it. And still there are lots of things I don't know. So can you just like, if you know, if you've evaluated your components, will it just view them? Probably not if they use, well, I guess, yeah, if you, yeah, maybe. The other thing I was talking to Tim about a while ago was, I don't yet know if the data can go the other way. So if we can put a slider in Portal that is sending the data back into my context, that, like, you know, updating an atom. I don't know whether I can get a slider in Portal to update an atom that isn't, but I think, I have a suspicion that it's, yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to talk about it because I don't know. But it's there are lots of things I want to look into with Portal. I've barely scratched the surface.
So, Chris, thank you very much for the talk, because I use Portal on everyday basis as well, and but I use very basic, you know, functions, and I have a huge amount of insights just after your talk, you know. Thank you very much for it. And I just want to make a little addition of how I use it as well, because the main project I'm working on, it's kind of proxy server between the final user and a lot of services on the backend. And this proxy service always makes HTTP calls to this backend service. And without Portal, I don't know how to solve the most of the task, because on an everyday basis, you need to check what kind of response you get and so on. But this response is on the backend side. It's none of the log can help with it. You know, if you have a huge map at the return, there is no way to inspect it with a log. And with the Portal, with just a simple tap, it saves a huge amount of time just to, you know, to discover what's wrong with the response or things like that. So I found it very, very helpful, even with the basic usage, without these tweaks from Chris.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, yeah, Tim's had a lot of me, Tim, or currently Joe, has had a lot of me talking about how much I love Portal and all the tricks that I use. You might want to just do something like tap out Bob at the top of your function. What I find is that when you do that, it's if you've tapped out 20 things, it's hard to tell where they've come from. So I nearly always actually tap out a map with a label attached to it, just so that I can tell what like where it's come from. Sometimes sometimes I will actually have like a function call, and I'll just add a tap at the top of the function call that taps out what all the arguments were to that function. And then obviously, if you do that, you can then do, you can click on those arguments and then bring them back into Portal and just do apply function at P, and you can rerun it with the same arguments. So it's that's I think that's quite a good, useful trick. I don't know if Yuri does the same thing, but yeah, I almost never just tap out an individual value. I always try and tap out a map, because I just find that being able to put a label on something makes it a lot easier to find things when I'm scrolling down a massive list.
Yeah, and another very useful scenario is in my project we use this pedestal library, which is, you know, like a chain of interceptors which runs different stuff. And if you put the stubs, you know, somewhere in the chain, you can see how the context of the pedestal evaluates through the time through this interceptors calls, and see where exactly you have a problem or what exactly you have things to fix and so on. It's really useful, because Portal here preserve you the order of the operation, and you can navigate them and see how it was changing and so on. And yeah, I use the same trick with label.
Yeah, I think if you used it on a like a somebody help me out. What's the framework for serving the way you have like a chain of handlers? Anyway,
the interceptor chain is Safari in
it doesn't matter. Let's say you've got a chain. Let's say you've got a chain of middleware. You can just add taps throughout that middleware, or it's just data. You could, you know, use interpose to just insert taps in between, get it to tap out as your request is changing, and then you can even select multiple of them and then use the diff to see as it's changed what the changes are between each step. So I'm aware that I'm sort of getting a bit late, so I will just very quickly talk about the fact that first of all, that you can come and ask me about Portal anytime and I will talk your ear off. You can also, there are a couple of like developing with data tools that are worth mentioning. If you don't want to use Portal, there is actually an inspect last S expression in Emacs that gives you a view. It's not as good. It's not as good. Nothing's as good as Portal, but it does let you sort of navigate the data without just having like a static text output. Reveal is it's like Portal, but JVM based instead of web based. I used to use Reveal until I discovered Portal, and I prefer Portal. There is a Reveal Pro as well, which I think adds some database functions I've not used. I consider Babashka to be a developing with data tool because it's the idea that rather than using text strings to talk between your shell command things, you could just pass a map between them. You just keep the information as data a little bit longer. And Microsoft did it first. Well, Microsoft did it before Babashka. PowerShell does the same thing. It passes objects between your commandlets that you can then pull properties out of. So in conclusion, I've shown a tiny glimpse of it. Everybody should now go make Portal their REPL. Never open the REPL again. My REPL is better than yours. Does anybody have any other questions before we end up? No?
I guess I put this in the chat, but I was wondering actually if you could show an example of one of those custom taps that you've made, and is that like a macro or is it a function that just sort of calls tap, or are you too
ashamed? Let's say everything here is let's pretend that it was hacked up for the sake of this presentation and not that I actually use these things. So here's the tap rec, and it's just a function that takes the request, adds the curl, and then attaches it, and then calls uses the ring request viewer. So that's a very simple tap. I do have tap macros for things that needed macro type things, like have I got it in here? I don't have it in here. No, there it is. It's like a macro to interpose the tap into a chain. I mean, I do have. I will show. I didn't want to show, but I'm going to do it because somebody asked me to show something ugly, so I'll show something even uglier. So this is the code for the. Let's do the ring response. Let's do the ring request. So the ring request viewer. If you want to register your own components, you need to call this register viewer with a predicate that basically says, make the viewer available when this is true. You give it a name and then you point it at a component. So this is the ring request viewer. It's very simple. The only sort of not so fun thing about this is that you have to actually send this to Portal. You can't just use it as, you can't just evaluate these. So you have to call Portal eval string. And then what I've been doing is slurping in my my CLJS files. That was the bit that I didn't really want to show because it's not very pretty, but yeah.
Yeah, do you know if it would be possible to have information such as the file and like file location that something is tapped at, and then attach that to metadata somehow? Just thinking, like, I've been using Portal for a few days, mainly because you kept going on about it so much, and it is great, I agree. But the main thing that annoys me is that, I think you've already said this, you can't see what things are unless you like have the unlaziness, definitely a word, to add labels to everything, which I don't. So I would like automatic labels, please, and I'll wait for you to do that.
So one of the things that is worth mentioning is you can, when you open up Portal, you can actually redefine how this works. So by default, this is an atom that is a list that grows upwards, uses inspector viewers. If you really wanted to, you could get it to pull out something from the metadata and always display that to the left of it, for example. And then all you have to do is work out what kind of tap helper you would create to pull out the source path. So the reason why I opened this back up again is because the exception viewer, I know that down here, that's, you know, the exception has that information in it. Well, no source file, so that's a good example. But the exception viewer has that information in it. So there's a way to get it out. Probably you already know how to get it out.
There is, I think there's another undocumented part of Portal, which is Portal log, which is it adds a little bit more metadata from context to put into the Portal viewer, and that way you should be able to link back to the file and see where it's been printed from. I did create a very, very hacky reader macro to do just that, actually, which I can share, but your mileage may vary with usage. Okay, I think we may be pressing a little close to time, so I'll say, Chris, thank you very much for that talk. That was really excellent. And I actually have a few more questions myself, and I'm sure other people do as well. I'm going to drop off this call and stop the recording, but if people want to hang on here and ask Chris some more questions, please do feel free to, or just pop it in the internal channel on Slack.